Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Emma, and as always, I'm joined by my favorite co-host, Jake. How are you doing today, Jake?
I'm doing really well, thanks for asking. I just got back from a weekend trip, actually, so I'm feeling that mix of exhausted and inspired at the same time. You know that feeling?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. That post-travel haze where your body is tired, but your brain is still buzzing with everything you saw and experienced. So that's actually a perfect lead-in to today's topic, because we're talking about getting lost in a new city. And Jake, I have a feeling you've got some stories.
Oh, do I have stories? You have no idea. Getting lost is basically my travel superpower, except it's completely involuntary and usually happens at the worst possible moment.
Okay, so before we dive into the stories, let's just set the scene a little. Getting lost in a new city, it's something almost every traveler experiences, right? Whether you're visiting for a weekend or you've just moved somewhere new. Jake, can you describe what that feeling is like? That moment you realize you actually have no idea where you are?
Yeah, it's a very specific feeling, honestly. There's this moment, I call it the uh-oh moment, where you look around and nothing matches what you expected to see. Like you were following a mental map in your head, and suddenly that map just dissolves. And for a second, your brain kind of freezes.
That's such a good way to put it. The mental map dissolves. And I think what makes it interesting is that the emotional reaction can be so different from person to person. Some people immediately panic, and others, and I think this might be you, Jake, actually find it kind of exciting.
You're reading me pretty well. I mean, the first 30 seconds are always slightly stressful, I won't lie about that. But then something shifts. I start thinking, okay, I'm somewhere I wasn't expecting to be. What's actually around me right now? And sometimes what's around you is genuinely more interesting than where you were trying to go.
I love that perspective. And I think that's actually a really mature way to travel, being open to the unexpected. The word I'd use is adaptable. You're adaptable, meaning you can adjust quickly to situations that didn't go according to plan.
Exactly. And I think travel kind of forces you to become more adaptable, whether you want to or not. The city doesn't care about your plans. It just exists, and you have to figure out how to move through it.
So let's get into a real story. Tell me about a time you genuinely got lost, like properly disoriented, in a city you didn't know.
Okay, so the most memorable one was in Lisbon, Portugal. Beautiful city, by the way. Highly recommend it. But the streets there are famously confusing. They twist and wind in ways that don't follow any logical grid. And I had wandered away from my hotel without really thinking about it, just following whatever looked interesting.
Which is a very Jake thing to do, I imagine.
Absolutely. So I spent about 2 hours just exploring on foot, going up these hilly streets. Lisbon is very hilly, by the way. And at some point, I looked at my phone and the battery was at 3%. No charger, no portable power bank, and I suddenly realized I had absolutely no idea which direction the hotel was.
Oh no, 3%. That is a nightmare scenario. What did you do?
So I did what I think most people do in that situation. I panicked for about 90 seconds, and then I tried to think logically. I remembered that the hotel was near the river, the Tagus River, and Lisbon's river is quite wide and visible from a lot of elevated points. So I thought if I can find high ground, I can probably spot the river and use it as a reference point.
That's actually really smart. Using a landmark, something fixed and large and visible, as a navigation point. A landmark is basically any feature of a landscape or cityscape that's easy to identify and helps you figure out where you are.
Right. And in many cities, there's usually at least one major landmark you can use to orient yourself. Orient yourself, meaning to figure out which direction you're facing, to get your bearings. In Lisbon, that was the river. In Paris, it might be the Eiffel Tower. In New York, you can look at which side of the street the building numbers are going up or down.
I've heard that tip about New York. The grid system there actually makes it one of the easier cities to navigate once you understand the logic. But a lot of cities in Europe, and especially older cities, have no grid at all. They were built organically over hundreds of years.
Exactly. Lisbon, Rome, Istanbul, these are cities that grew out of ancient settlements, and the streets often follow old trade routes or the natural shape of the land. So there's no neat pattern to rely on. You really have to use landmarks or ask people.
And that brings up something interesting, asking for directions, because I feel like this is something a lot of people are surprisingly reluctant to do, either because of pride or because they're shy, or in some cases because of a language barrier.
The language barrier is real. I mean, in Lisbon, my Portuguese is basically non-existent. I know obrigado, which means thank you, and that's about it. But what I found is that even with very limited shared language, people are usually incredibly willing to help. You point, you gesture, you say the name of the place, and somehow it works.
It's amazing how much you can communicate without words, isn't it? There's actually a term for that, nonverbal communication. And when you're lost in a foreign city, you suddenly become very good at it very quickly.
Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. That expression means that when you really need something, you find a way to make it happen. And finding your way back to your hotel is a pretty strong motivator.
Okay, so you found high ground, you spotted the river, and then what?
So then I just started walking downhill, generally toward where I thought the river was. And on the way, I stopped at a small cafe and asked the woman behind the counter if she spoke English. She said a little bit. I showed her the hotel name written on a piece of paper I found in my pocket. It was the check-in receipt, actually. And she basically drew me a little map on a napkin.
That is such a lovely image, a hand-drawn map on a napkin. There's something very human about that.
It was genuinely touching. She spent like 5 minutes on it, drew little arrows, wrote straight, left, church, big stairs, and I followed that napkin map and made it back in about 20 minutes.
I love that story so much, and it also shows something important, that locals are generally your best resource when you're lost. Not just for directions, but for understanding the city in a way that no app can really replicate.
100%. Apps are great for getting you from A to B efficiently, but a local will tell you things like, oh, don't go that way at night, or there's a shortcut through that alley, or you should stop at this bakery on the corner, it's incredible. That context is invaluable.
Invaluable, meaning so useful that it's hard to even put a price on it. It's beyond value. And I think that's what makes getting lost occasionally, accidentally I mean, actually a worthwhile experience. Because you end up interacting with a city in a way that tourists who follow the guidebook perfectly never do.
There's a word for that kind of spontaneous exploration, serendipity, finding something good or valuable without deliberately looking for it. And getting lost is basically an engine for serendipity.
Oh, I really like that framing. Getting lost as an engine for serendipity. Have you had experiences where you stumbled upon something great specifically because you were lost?
Several times. In Lisbon, actually, before the phone dying incident, I found this tiny bookshop tucked into the bottom floor of an old building. It was beautiful, full of old maps and illustrated books, and there was a cat sleeping on the counter. Completely off the beaten track, meaning not in any tourist guide, not the kind of place you'd find by searching online.
Off the beaten track. I love that expression. It literally refers to a path that not many people walk on, so it hasn't been worn down. And figuratively, it means something that's not mainstream or widely known.
Exactly. And I never would have found that place if I'd been efficiently following a map app from one tourist attraction to the next. Getting a little lost gave me space to actually notice things.
This is making me reflect on my own experience of getting lost, which is much less romantic than yours, I'll be honest.
Oh, come on, let's hear it.
Okay, so mine was in Tokyo, which is a city I absolutely love, by the way. It's extraordinary. But the subway system there is notoriously complex. It has multiple overlapping lines run by different companies, and the signs, while mostly in both Japanese and English, can be genuinely overwhelming.
I've heard Tokyo's subway is something else. Like, even people who live there find it complicated.
Yes, and locals confirm this. I got on the right train, but in the wrong direction, which I didn't realize for about 4 stops. And then when I tried to correct it, I accidentally transferred to a completely different line, and suddenly I was in a part of the city I had no frame of reference for whatsoever.
No frame of reference, meaning you had no context, no prior knowledge, nothing to anchor your understanding of where you were.
Exactly. And the thing about Tokyo is that it's massive. The greater Tokyo area has something like 37 million people. So being in the wrong neighborhood isn't like being a 10-minute walk from where you need to be. It could be 45 minutes by train.
And if you're on a schedule, that's genuinely stressful.
I was supposed to meet a friend for dinner at a specific time, and I was already running late, and my phone signal was patchy underground. I remember standing in a subway station, looking at this enormous, incredibly colorful map on the wall, and just feeling completely frozen. That word again, frozen. Like your brain just refuses to process information because there's too much of it.
Information overload. It's a real cognitive phenomenon. When you receive more input than your brain can comfortably handle, it actually slows down your decision-making, which is the opposite of what you need when you're lost and running late.
Exactly the opposite. So what I ended up doing was finding a station attendant. There are always staff in Tokyo subway stations, which is wonderful, and just showing him my friend's address on my phone screen. He was incredibly patient, walked me to the correct platform, and even mimed how many stops I needed to go. 5 fingers held up.
5 stops. And that worked?
It worked perfectly. I made it to dinner only 15 minutes late, which honestly felt like a victory given how far off course I'd gone.
15 minutes late in Tokyo? I imagine your friend was both relieved and not entirely surprised.
She laughed at me for a solid 5 minutes, but we still talk about it. It became a kind of shared story, you know? And I think that's something worth noting. Getting lost, once it's over and you're safe, almost always becomes a good story.
The Type 2 fun concept applies perfectly here. Type 2 fun is something that's not enjoyable in the moment, but becomes a great memory afterward. Like hiking up a really steep mountain, miserable while you're doing it, incredible once you reach the top.
That's such a useful concept. And I think most travel falls into that category to some degree. Discomfort in the moment, richness in the memory.
Can I add something about the emotional arc of being lost? Because I think there are actually distinct stages, and recognizing them can help you stay calmer.
Oh, yes, please. Break it down for us.
So stage 1 is denial. You think, I'm not really lost, I just need to walk a bit further and I'll recognize something. Stage 2 is the panic spike. That's when you genuinely accept you're lost and your stress response kicks in. Stage 3 is what I'd call the problem-solving reset. You take a breath, you stop moving, and you start thinking rationally. And stage 4 is resolution, which is either finding your way or getting help.
That's a really clear framework. And I think the key transition is between stage 2 and stage 3, that moment where you choose to stop panicking and start thinking. That's actually a skill you can develop.
Absolutely. And one very practical tip for that moment: stop walking. I know it feels counterintuitive. Instinct says keep moving, do something. But if you stop, you give yourself a chance to observe your surroundings properly. You might notice something you missed while you were rushing.
That's such good advice. Stand still, look around slowly, take stock of what you can see. Take stock, meaning to carefully assess your situation, to look at what you have and where you are before deciding what to do next.
And if you can, find a safe, visible place to stand while you do this. Don't go down a quiet alley trying to find a shortcut when you're already disoriented. Stay somewhere open.
Safety is genuinely important here, because getting lost in a new city isn't just a navigational challenge. It can have real safety implications, especially at night or in an unfamiliar neighborhood, or if you're traveling alone.
Right. And this is where a bit of preparation before you leave your accommodation goes a long way. Even something as simple as taking a screenshot of your hotel's address or writing it down on paper, because phones die, we've established that, can completely change how manageable a situation is if things go wrong.
Screenshot the address, write it down, know the name of your neighborhood. These are small habits that make a big difference. And I'd add, take note of a couple of landmarks near where you're staying. So when you're trying to explain where you need to go, you can say, near the big clock tower or beside the central market.
Landmarks as communication tools. Yes, completely agree. And actually, one thing I always do now is take a photo of the street outside my hotel when I first arrive. Just a quick snapshot. So if I need to show it to someone, I have a visual reference of exactly what I'm looking for.
That is a genuinely clever tip. And I'm slightly annoyed I hadn't thought of it myself.
You're welcome. I learned it the hard way, though, so you're getting it for free.
Let's talk about technology for a second, because obviously the conversation about getting lost has changed significantly with smartphones and GPS.
In theory, you should almost never get lost anymore. And yet, people still do. Why do you think that is?
I have a few theories. One is over-reliance. People trust their phones so completely that they stop paying attention to their physical surroundings. So the moment the phone fails, battery dies, signal drops, app glitches, they're completely helpless because they never built any spatial awareness.
Spatial awareness, meaning your sense of where you are in physical space relative to other things. Your understanding of direction, distance, and surroundings.
Exactly. And if you've spent your whole trip just staring at a little blue dot on a screen, you haven't actually learned anything about the city's layout. You couldn't find your way back to the hotel without the app, even if it was only 3 streets away.
That's such a real phenomenon. I've noticed it in myself, too. There are cities I visited multiple times using navigation apps, and I still couldn't draw you a rough map of the center because I was just following instructions rather than understanding the space.
Compare that to cities where I've genuinely gotten lost and had to figure it out. I remember those layouts much better. My brain was actually engaged in processing spatial information, not just following arrows.
There's probably some neuroscience behind that. The idea that solving a problem yourself embeds the information more deeply than passively receiving instructions, active learning versus passive learning.
And the same principle applies to language learning, actually, which I know is relevant to our audience. You remember words and phrases so much better when you've had to actually use them in a real situation, under a little bit of pressure, rather than just reading them in a list.
That's a beautiful connection. And it wasn't even planned. But it's true. Necessity creates retention. When you desperately need to remember how to say, "Where is the train station?" you remember it.
For life. You will never forget it.
Okay, so we've talked about the emotional experience, the practical strategies, the role of technology. Let's talk about something slightly different. The difference between being lost as a tourist versus being lost when you've just moved to a new city. Because I think those are actually quite different experiences emotionally.
Oh, completely different stakes. When you're a tourist and you get lost, it's an adventure with a time limit. You know you're going home eventually. But when you've just moved somewhere and you get lost, especially in the first few days, it can feel much more destabilizing.
Destabilizing is the perfect word. Because your whole sense of security in a new place depends partly on feeling like you can navigate it. Like you can get to the supermarket and back, or find your office on the first day of work. And if you can't do those basic things, it chips away at your confidence.
And I think a lot of people who've moved to a new city, especially in a new country, maybe in a different language, go through a period that's a bit like extended lostness. Not just physically, but socially and culturally. You don't know the unwritten rules. You don't know which neighborhoods are which. You don't know where people actually go on a Friday night.
That's really well put. There's a concept called culture shock, which most people know. But within culture shock, there's this very specific feeling of spatial disorientation, of not knowing how the city works at a physical, practical level, and that can be quite isolating.
And the remedy for it, interestingly, is similar to the remedy for a literal being lost. Stop, look around, ask people. Be willing to seem like you don't know what you're doing, because you don't, and that's okay.
Which requires a certain kind of humility. And I think that's underrated as a travel skill and as a life skill, being comfortable enough with not knowing to ask for help without feeling embarrassed.
Some cultures are much more comfortable with this than others, too. In some countries, asking for help or admitting you're confused is just normal. In others, there's more of a social pressure to appear competent and self-sufficient. And if you've grown up in the latter kind of culture, learning to ask for help can actually be a bit of a personal challenge.
That's a really interesting cultural dimension to add, and it connects to language learning too, because one of the biggest barriers for intermediate learners especially is the fear of making mistakes or sounding unsure, that reluctance to ask, to admit you don't know something.
And yet the people who progress fastest are almost always the ones who are willing to try and fail and ask follow-up questions. Just like the best way to navigate a new city is to engage with it, not just observe it from a safe distance.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, the idea that getting lost can actually lead to better discoveries than following a set itinerary. Do you think there's a way to build that kind of openness intentionally into how you travel?
Definitely. One thing I sometimes do is what I call structured wandering.
I'll plan my morning, I know where I need to be, I sort out the important things, but then I'll deliberately leave an afternoon completely unplanned. No destination, no checklist. I just walk in a direction that looks interesting and see what happens.
I really like that approach. You're giving yourself permission to explore without guilt, because sometimes the pressure of having a packed itinerary actually stops you from noticing what's right in front of you.
Right. You're so focused on getting to the next thing on your list that you walk past something genuinely fascinating without registering it. The schedule becomes a kind of tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision, only being able to see what's directly ahead of you without peripheral awareness of what's around you. And in travel, that metaphor really holds up.
And I think to wrap this back around to language learning, it's the same with studying. If you're so focused on finishing the textbook chapter, hitting the vocabulary target, ticking the boxes, you can miss the spontaneous learning moments that happen in real conversations.
The moments of genuine communication that are unscripted and therefore much more valuable. Because that's what language is for, real connection, not perfect performance.
Exactly. Nobody is impressed that you know all the grammar rules if you freeze up the moment a real person starts talking to you. What matters is whether you can actually communicate, even imperfectly.
That said, preparation still matters. Knowing some vocabulary, having some phrases, it's like having a rough map before you enter the city. You don't need to know every street, but it helps to know the general shape of things.
A rough map is the perfect analogy. Good enough to get you oriented, flexible enough that you're not panicking when reality doesn't match it exactly.
I love how this conversation has woven together travel and language learning without it feeling forced. That was very organic.
We're just naturally insightful people, Emma.
Obviously. Okay, I want to get our listeners a few concrete, practical phrases they can use if they find themselves lost in an English-speaking city, or really in any city where English is the backup language.
Great idea. Let's do it conversationally. I'll suggest some situations and you can think through what you'd say.
Perfect. Okay, first situation, you're standing on a street corner with no idea which direction to walk. You see someone who looks local. What do you say?
Something simple and polite. Excuse me, sorry to bother you. I'm a bit turned around. Could you point me in the direction of the city center? Turned around is a casual way of saying lost or disoriented. It's softer than saying I'm completely lost, which can feel a bit dramatic.
And notice, could you point me in the direction of? It's more natural than can you tell me where is, which is a common mistake for intermediate learners. You'd say, can you tell me where the station is, keeping the question structure in the embedded clause.
Right. The word order doesn't flip in an indirect question. Do you know where the market is? Not, do you know where is the market? It's a small thing, but it makes a big difference to how natural you sound.
Second situation, someone gives you directions and they're talking too fast. What do?
You say, I'm sorry, could you say that again a little more slowly? I want to make sure I've got it right. That phrase, I want to make sure I've got it right, signals that you're engaged and serious, not just nodding along. People respond really well to that.
And it's completely legitimate. Native speakers talk fast, directions especially, because people say them almost automatically, like they're reciting something. Slowing them down is perfectly reasonable.
You can also ask them to write it down if that feels appropriate. Would you mind writing the name of the street for me? Most people are happy to do that.
Third situation, you've been walking for a while following someone's directions, and you're not sure you went the right way. You stop another person.
Excuse me, I'm looking for place name. Am I going in the right direction or have I missed it? The phrase, am I going in the right direction, is great because it's open-ended. It invites a yes, a correction, or more information.
And have I missed it shows you're aware it might be behind you, which local people appreciate because it means you've been paying attention, even if you went wrong.
And if all else fails, if there's a real language barrier, show them your phone with the address or the name on the screen. Point, gesture. Humans are remarkably good at helping each other when both parties are genuinely trying.
Which is honestly a hopeful thing to remember. Most people, in most cities, in most countries, will try to help a lost person. There's something fairly universal about that impulse.
I genuinely believe that. In all my experiences of being lost, I have never once had someone refuse to try to help. They might not have been able to, but they tried.
And that's kind of a beautiful note to end on, isn't it? The city can feel overwhelming and disorienting, but it's also full of people, and most of those people are willing to help if you just ask.
Getting lost reminds you that you're not alone out there, even when you feel like you are.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up. Jake, this was such a great conversation. You've given us stories, practical advice, some really lovely ideas about travel and language and human connection. I think our listeners got a lot out of this.
It was a pleasure. And to anyone listening who's nervous about getting lost, don't be. It's uncomfortable for about 20 minutes, and then it becomes a story you tell for years. Trust the process.
Trust the process. I love it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening today. If you've had your own experience of getting lost in a new city, and I suspect most of you have, we'd love to hear about it. Reach out, share your story, because every lost story is a good story in the end. Take care of yourselves, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you then. Safe travels, everyone.